Why does she always wear the same clothes? The woman reaching for the same avocado as me at Whole Foods was wearing this green dress that made her look like a model. I definitely stared too long. I never know how to tell if they're ripe, she said. 3 days, I said. This one needs 3 days. How can you possibly know that? She asked. I can't, I said, but I say it confidently and nobody questions me. She laughed, and we talked for 20 minutes until I asked her to dinner. Her name was Chelsea. Friday, she walked into the restaurant in the same green dress from Whole Foods. I thought that was a little strange, but hey, it was a great dress. But on our second date, she wore the green dress again, which was a little weird. But I thought, whatever, maybe it's her favorite, and she was too great for me to care about her repeating a dress a couple times. But on date 3, she walked in wearing the green dress, and I could not get it out of my head. What was going on? I told my friend Steve about it that night. The exact same dress? He said. That's what I need to figure out, I said. Maybe she has multiples. Like a cartoon character? He said. Or maybe it's one dress she washes every night, I said. So ask her, he said. Too weird now, I said. Should have asked on date 2, but I missed my window. Date 4, same dress. I tried the compliment approach. Love your dress. Is it new? No, she said. Looks new, I said. Thanks, she said. Looks brand new, actually, I said. Like you just bought it. You're being weird, she said. Date 5. I studied the dress for any identifying marks while she talked about her job. There was nothing. No pills, no pulls, no fading, no loose threads, nothing that would identify it as the same exact dress or prove there were multiples. Date 7. I brought a tiny piece of double-sided tape, and when I hugged her hello, I tried to stick it to the back of the dress so I could check next time if the tape was still there, but she pulled away too fast, and the tape ended up on my hand. Your hands are sticky, she said. I ate candy in the car, I lied. After a month, I created a spreadsheet tracking every appearance of the dress with columns for date, time, condition, and observations. My roommate found it and asked if I needed professional help. This is insane, he said, looking at my color-coded charts. I just need to know, I said. Why? He asked. Because it doesn't make sense, I said. She's normal in every other way. But she showed me a picture of her from her sister's wedding last year and a picture of her in high school, and it was the same dress. How has she not explained this? How am I supposed to just accept the mystery? Steve understood the assignment, and we'd spend hours together floating possibilities. We decided I should take her to the beach to see what happened. She wore the green dress there, and then said she didn't feel like swimming after all, and we just sat on the sand. I was getting annoyed with her now, but I wasn't going to break things off, because then I'd never find out the truth. I got her to let me up to her apartment to use the bathroom after the beach trip, so I could snoop inside her closet. But there was no closet in her bedroom. I couldn't find her clothes anywhere. I thought she must have different clothes for work, because it would have to be a HR thing if she wore the same dress every day, right? The people at work would be bothered like I was, wouldn't they? So I followed her to work. She went in wearing the green dress at 9 a.m., and I sat there until 6 p.m. when she came out still wearing the green dress. Were you outside my office? She texted later. No, I texted back. My coworker saw you, she said. Weird of her, I said back. Then I got online and hired a private investigator. She wears the same green dress every day, he reported. I know that, I exploded. But why? He shrugged. But is it the same dress or different ones? I asked desperately. I don't know, he said. You want me to break into her apartment? Would you? I asked. No, he said, and blocked my number. Date 30. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't talk to her like she was a normal person. I just sat there staring at the dress. It was like it was taunting me. Stop staring at me, she said. Sorry, I said, now staring harder. Date 35. I'd given up and accepted I'd never know the truth when she invited me to stay over for the first time. Before that, she'd only come to my apartment. I realized this was my chance. I spent the whole evening trying to figure out how to get away to look into her closet, but then she shocked me to my core by saying, I need to get something from my closet, on her own accord. Almost fell off the bed because this was it. This was finally it. I was going to see inside her closet. I watched her walk to what looked like a blank wall and put her hand on it. My heart was pounding because in 5 seconds I would finally know if she had one dress or multiple dresses, or what the hell was going on with the dress situation. Don't look, she said suddenly. What? I said. Turn around, she said. I need privacy. To open your closet? I asked. Please, she said. But, I started. Turn around or leave, she said. I turned around, but I could see the wall in the mirror on her dresser, and I watched her hand press against it, and the wall started to open, and I could see inside there was green fabric, and then, actually, never mind, she said. Oh my God, I can't, I screamed. Just tell me! She went completely still, and her face changed from surprised to something cold and hard. She stepped back from the wall and crossed her arms. You need to leave, she said. Right now. I started to say something, but she held up her hand. I'm serious. Whatever this is, whatever you think is happening here, I need you to go. I grabbed my shoes and my jacket, and she walked me to the door without saying another word. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood in the hallway for a minute before I could make my feet move toward the stairs. Outside the building, the night air hit my face, and I realized how hot I'd been inside. My hands were shaking when I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes just staring at her building. I kept replaying the moment I screamed at her. Actually screamed. Over a dress. I'd been so close to seeing inside that closet, and then I ruined everything by losing control. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove home and couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face when I yelled. I grabbed my phone around 3 in the morning and opened Instagram, but her profile wouldn't load. I tried Facebook and got an error message. I sent her a text apologizing, and the bubble stayed green instead of turning blue. She'd blocked me, completely blocked me from everything. I sat there staring at the green text bubble until the sun came up. The reality of what I'd done settled into my chest like a weight. I'd followed her to work. I'd hired someone to watch her. I'd screamed at her in her own apartment about her clothes. Steve called around noon, and I told him everything. He came over and sat on my couch while I paced around explaining the whole night. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he looked at me for a long time. "You need professional help, man," he said. I knew he was right. My roommate came home while Steve was still there and overheard us talking. After Steve left, my roommate sat me down at the kitchen table. He said I'd been acting weird for months, and he'd tried to ignore it, but this was too much. "Either you get therapy or I'm finding a new place to live," he said. "I can't watch you do this to yourself anymore." I promised him I'd make an appointment. The next 3 days, I barely ate anything. I'd open the fridge and stare at the food, but nothing seemed worth the effort. Sleep came in short bursts between hours of lying awake replaying every date with Chelsea. The spreadsheet was still open on my laptop, and every time I sat down to work, I'd see it there mocking me. All those columns and color codes and observations. All that time I'd spent tracking her instead of just being normal. I'd close it and then open it again an hour later. Steve texted me a link on the 3rd day. It was a therapist's website, Jane Schneider. She worked with people who had obsessive behavior patterns. I clicked through every page on her site reading about her approach and her background. I sat there for an hour looking at the book appointment button before I finally called the number. The receptionist said the first opening was a week away. A whole week felt impossible. I said I'd take it. Work became this thing I had to force myself to do. I'd sit at my desk and stare at my computer screen, but nothing made sense. My phone stayed next to my keyboard, and I kept checking it, hoping somehow Chelsea had unblocked me. She never did. I started writing apology texts, even though I couldn't send them. I'd type out long paragraphs explaining how sorry I was, and then delete them. I wrote maybe 15 different versions. Each one sounded worse than the last, more desperate, more pathetic. I saved one in my notes app even though I knew I'd never be able to send it. My boss emailed me on Friday asking if everything was okay. I'd missed a deadline for the first time in 3 years. The project had just slipped past me while I was staring at my phone waiting for Chelsea to magically forgive me. I wrote back saying I was dealing with some personal stuff and I'd have it done by Monday. I finished the project that weekend, but it felt like moving through mud. Every task took twice as long as it should have. My roommate ordered pizza Saturday night and made me eat 2 slices. He didn't mention Chelsea or therapy. He just put on a basketball game and we sat there watching it. It was the first time in days I felt almost normal. Almost. The next night, Steve dragged me to this sports bar downtown that smelled like fried food and had too many TVs on the walls. We grabbed a booth in the back, and he ordered us both beers without asking what I wanted. He started talking about his job and some drama with his coworker, and I tried really hard to focus on what he was saying. I nodded at the right times and made sounds like I was listening, but my brain kept sliding back to Chelsea and the dress and how badly I'd messed everything up. Steve kept going for maybe 10 minutes about office politics, and then he asked me a direct question about what I thought, and I had no idea what he'd just said. He sighed and took a long drink of his beer. I apologized and said I was trying, but he just shook his head and told me he knew where my brain was. I promised I'd focus better, and he started telling me about a basketball game he'd watched, but within 5 minutes I was thinking about that moment in Chelsea's bedroom when the wall started opening. Steve stopped mid-sentence and just looked at me. I asked what, and he said I had that look again. What look, I said. The obsessed look, he said. We sat there in silence for a minute, and then I admitted I couldn't stop thinking about it. About what he asked, even though he obviously knew. The dress situation, I said. The whole mystery. Steve put his head in his hands and told me I needed help yesterday, not tomorrow. I know, I said. The therapy appointment is in 6 days. 6 days is too long, he said, but there's nothing I can do about it. We finished our beers without talking much and he drove me home. That night I couldn't sleep again, so I got up around 2 a.m. and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet was right there on my desktop where it had been for weeks. I clicked on it and stared at all the rows and columns. Date, time, location, dress condition, observations. There were 38 entries. 38 times I documented what Chelsea wore instead of just enjoying being with her. I moved my cursor to the delete button and just sat there. My hand was shaking a little. This spreadsheet felt like the only proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Like if I deleted it, then all that time and effort meant nothing. But keeping it meant I was still holding on to the obsession. I clicked delete, and the confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I stared at it for probably an hour. My roommate got up to use the bathroom and saw me sitting there in the dark. He asked if I was okay, and I said I was deleting the spreadsheet. Good, he said. Do it. But I didn't do it right away. I sat there until almost 4 a.m. before I finally clicked yes. The file disappeared, and I felt this weird, empty feeling like I'd lost something important, even though I knew it was completely crazy to feel that way. The morning of my therapy appointment, I woke up nervous. I'd never been to therapy before, and I didn't know what to expect. Jane Schneider's office was in this quiet building downtown, with a small waiting room that had soft lighting and comfortable chairs. A receptionist told me to have a seat, and Jane would be right with me. I sat down and picked up a magazine, but couldn't focus on any of the words. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair came out and introduced herself. She had this calm way of talking that immediately made me feel less like a total disaster. We walked back to her office, which had big windows and plants everywhere. She gestured to a couch, and I sat down while she took the chair across from me. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I just started talking. I told her everything, about meeting Chelsea at Whole Foods, about the green dress showing up on every single date, about the spreadsheet and the following and hiring the private investigator, about the moment in her bedroom when I finally lost it and screamed at her. Jane listened without interrupting and wrote some notes on a pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute, and then she said something that hit me hard. She said I'd crossed a line from curiosity into harassment. The word harassment made my stomach drop, because that's not how I'd been thinking about it. I tried to explain that I was just trying to understand, and she held up her hand. She told me that what started as normal curiosity became a compulsion and then became something worse when I started surveillance. Following someone to work and hiring a private investigator wasn't curiosity anymore. It was violating her privacy and her right to feel safe. I sat there feeling sick, because she was completely right. Jane asked me when I thought the curiosity became obsession, and I thought about it. Probably around date 7, I said, when I brought the sticky tape to mark the dress. She asked what I was hoping to accomplish with that, and I admitted I just needed to know if it was the same dress or different ones. She asked why it mattered so much, and I didn't have a good answer. We spent the next 20 minutes talking about that moment with the tape and what was going through my head. Jane helped me see that needing to know had become more important than respecting Chelsea's boundaries or even enjoying our relationship. She asked what need the mystery was filling for me, and that question made me think hard. I realized I've always been someone who needs to solve puzzles and understand how things work. Even as a kid, I'd take things apart to see inside them. Not knowing something this basic about someone I was dating made me feel out of control. Jane nodded like this made sense to her. She explained that needing control is normal, but using other people to meet that need isn't okay. Chelsea wasn't a puzzle to solve. She was a person with her own reasons for her choices, and I didn't have a right to those reasons just because we were dating. By the end of the session, Jane gave me homework. She told me to write a genuine apology to Chelsea with no questions and no justifications, just accountability for what I'd done. She also told me to start a journal tracking when I felt compulsive urges to solve mysteries or control situations. I left her office feeling like someone had held up a mirror and forced me to look at myself. The next 2 days, I worked on the apology letter. I must have written 15 different versions. Every time I thought I had it right, I'd read it back and realize I was making excuses or trying to explain myself. I finally showed one to Steve, and he read it and told me to cut out 3 whole paragraphs. Too many excuses, he said. Just say what you did wrong and that you're sorry. No buts or becauses. I rewrote it again, and the final version was 4 sentences. I admitted I violated her privacy and trust. I said my behavior was wrong and there was no excuse for it. I apologized for making her feel unsafe. I told her she deserved better, and I was working on being better. That was it. No explanations about why I did it or how the mystery drove me crazy. Just acknowledgement of what I'd done. I printed it out and put it in an envelope. I thought about emailing it, but that felt too easy to ignore, and I couldn't text her because she'd blocked me. I drove to her apartment building and put the envelope in her mailbox. My hands were shaking when I dropped it in. I didn't expect a response, but Jane had said sending it was about my accountability, not about getting forgiveness. That night, my roommate was watching a basketball game in the living room, and he called me over to join him. We sat there watching the game and eating pizza, and he made some comment about a bad call. I actually responded with my own opinion about the ref, and we argued good-naturedly about it for a few minutes. After the game ended, he looked at me and said, I seemed better. Not great, but better. I told him I felt a little better, and he said good, because he'd been worried about me. It was the first real conversation we'd had in weeks that didn't involve him confronting me about my behavior. We talked about normal stuff like what we needed from the grocery store and whether we should replace the coffee maker that was acting up. Just regular roommate stuff. It felt almost normal, almost like I was starting to be myself again instead of this obsessed person I'd turned into. 10 days went by, and I was sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone when an unknown number popped up with a text. My stomach dropped because I knew somehow it was Chelsea before I even read it. The message said she got my letter and appreciated the apology. She was willing to meet me in person at a public place if I could follow some specific rules she needed to lay out first. I texted back immediately asking what the rules were. She responded within a minute with 3 clear points. First rule was, I had to listen more than I talked. Second rule was, I could not ask about the dress unless she brought it up herself. Third rule was, I had to accept this meeting was for closure and not for getting back together. I read through the rules twice and typed back that I agreed to everything. She sent me the address of a coffee shop near her office and said Thursday at noon would work for her. I confirmed and then just sat there staring at my phone for probably 20 minutes. Steve called that night and I told him about the text and the upcoming meeting. He said it was good she was giving me a chance to apologize in person, but warned me not to mess it up by pushing for more than she was offering. Thursday morning, I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. My hands were shaking, so I ordered a coffee just to have something to hold. She looked tired and her face was serious, but she seemed calm. I stood up when she got to the table and thanked her for meeting me. She sat down across from me and said she needed me to understand some things before we could have any kind of conversation. I nodded and kept my mouth shut like I promised. Chelsea started by explaining that being followed to work and finding out I hired someone to investigate her made her feel genuinely unsafe in her own life. She said she kept looking over her shoulder for weeks, wondering if I was watching her. The dress thing seemed silly on the surface, but my reaction to not getting answers revealed something really concerning about how I handle situations where I'm not in control. She told me that normal curiosity would have been asking her directly once, or maybe twice. What I did went way beyond that into obsessive and honestly scary behavior. I listened to every word and didn't interrupt, even though I wanted to apologize again. When she finished, I took a breath and told her she was completely right about everything. I owned the following and the private investigator and lurking outside her office. I didn't make any excuses or try to explain why I thought it was okay at the time. I just acknowledged that what I did was wrong and violated her privacy and trust in a serious way. I could see her shoulders relax a little bit when I didn't try to defend myself. She asked if I was seeing a therapist, and I told her about Jane and the work we were doing on my obsessive patterns. Chelsea said that was good, because what I did was not normal relationship curiosity, or even normal human curiosity. It crossed lines that showed I had some issues I needed to work through. Then she leaned back in her chair and said she would explain the dress situation since that's what started this whole mess. She told me she owns 7 identical green dresses. Having a personal uniform like that reduces her anxiety about making decisions every morning and helps her feel like herself. The concept is called decision fatigue, and lots of successful people do the same thing with their clothes. But she never explained it to me because she doesn't owe anyone an explanation for her clothing choices. It's her business and her life and her way of managing her mental health. I asked if I could ask one question and she said, okay. I asked about the closet and why it seemed like it wasn't there. She explained it's a custom flush panel built into the wall that keeps her bedroom looking clean and minimal. The minimalism also helps with her anxiety by reducing visual clutter. Everything I obsessed over for months had a completely reasonable explanation that she probably would have shared eventually if I'd just been patient and respectful instead of turning into a stalker. I sat there feeling incredibly stupid because it was all so simple and normal. 7 dresses for anxiety management and a custom closet for minimalism. That was it. That was the whole mystery I destroyed a relationship over. Chelsea leaned forward, and her voice got quieter but more serious. She told me going forward she needed me to understand some non-negotiable boundaries. No surveillance of any kind, not following her, not checking up on her, not asking people about her, no testing her or trying to catch her in anything. And if I was curious about something in the future with anyone, I asked directly one time, and then I let it go if they don't want to answer. I nodded immediately and told her I understood completely and would respect all of that. She studied my face for a minute like she was trying to decide if I meant it. Then she sat back and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She said she appreciated me coming here and being honest about everything, but she needed to be clear that she wasn't interested in continuing any kind of romantic relationship with me. My behavior had broken her trust too badly, and she couldn't see a path forward where she would feel safe with me. It stung hearing that out loud, but I understood completely. I told her I respected her decision, and I was sorry for putting her in a position where she had to make it. We sat there for another minute finishing our coffee and not really looking at each other. When she stood up, she said she hoped therapy went well and that I figured out the obsessive stuff. I thanked her for meeting me and for explaining everything. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, and I watched her go. The green dress looked exactly like it always had. As the door closed behind her, I felt this weird mix of relief at finally knowing the truth and shame at what it cost me. I sat there for another 10 minutes staring at my empty cup before I finally got up to leave. 3 days later, I was back in Jane's office for my regular appointment. I told her everything about the coffee shop meeting with Chelsea. Jane listened without interrupting and took a few notes. When I finished, she asked how I felt about finally getting the answer to the dress mystery. I said it felt less satisfying than I expected, because I lost something way more valuable than solving a mystery. Jane nodded and said that was an important recognition. We spent the rest of the session talking about how my need to know things had damaged a relationship that could have been good. She said the work ahead was building my tolerance for uncertainty and not knowing things. Before I left, she gave me specific exercises to practice. She wanted me to deliberately leave questions unanswered during my week. If I wondered something, I had to write it down and then sit with not knowing the answer. No Googling, no asking people, no investigating, just writing it down and moving on. She also wanted me to practice saying out loud that it was okay not to know things. I wrote everything down in my phone and promised I would actually do the exercises. The exercises turned out to be way harder than I expected. The first time I wanted to Google something, I had my phone in my hand before I even realized what I was doing. I forced myself to put it down and write the question in my notes app instead. My leg bounced under my desk for like 20 minutes. Not getting immediate answers made me genuinely anxious at first. My chest felt tight, and I kept picking up my phone and putting it back down. By day 3, I had 17 unanswered questions written down, and I felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin. But I kept doing it because I knew Jane was right. I needed to learn how to sit with not knowing things. On day 5, I noticed the anxiety was a tiny bit less intense. I still wanted answers, but I didn't feel like I was going to explode if I didn't get them immediately. Steve and I met up for lunch at this burger place we both like. He asked how I was doing with everything, and I told him about the coffee shop meeting with Chelsea. I explained the whole uniform dressing thing and how she owned 7 identical dresses for anxiety management. Steve laughed so hard he almost choked on his fries. He said all that surveillance and private investigators and spreadsheets for something totally normal that tons of people do. I laughed too, even though it still felt embarrassing. He asked if I was still seeing Jane, and I told him about the exercises. Steve said it sounded like good stuff, and he was glad I was taking it seriously. We spent the rest of lunch talking about normal things like basketball and his annoying coworker. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't about my obsessive behavior for once. Back at my apartment that night, my roommate and I had a conversation about establishing a check-in system. He said he wanted to be able to call me out if he noticed me starting to obsess over something again. I agreed immediately because I knew I needed someone watching for warning signs. We decided he could just straight up tell me if he saw me doing spreadsheets or researching someone too much or getting weird about small mysteries. I promised I wouldn't get defensive if he called me out. He said he was proud of me for doing the therapy work and dealing with this stuff. Having someone who knew me well, keeping me accountable, felt really helpful. I knew I couldn't trust myself to catch all my obsessive patterns on my own. The next day, I was sitting at my computer and realized I needed to apologize to someone else. Chelsea's coworker who spotted me lurking outside the office building. Her name was Katya, and I found her on LinkedIn pretty easily. I opened a message window and stared at the blank space for a while. I wrote and deleted probably 5 different versions before I settled on something short and direct. I told her I was the guy who was outside her office building a few months ago. I acknowledged that I crossed a serious line, and I apologized for making her workplace uncomfortable. I said I was getting help for my behavior. I hovered over the send button for a full minute before I finally clicked it. My stomach felt tight after I sent it, but I knew it was the right thing to do. 2 days later, I got a notification that Katya had responded. I opened the message and felt my shoulders tense up. She said she appreciated the apology and hoped I was getting the help I needed. She didn't engage beyond that, and her tone was polite but distant. I read it twice and then closed LinkedIn without responding. Jane had told me not to push for more interaction than people were willing to give. The fact that I could read her message and not write back asking questions or trying to explain myself more felt like actual progress. I told Jane about it in our next session, and she said that was exactly the right response. Learning to accept limited interaction without demanding more was part of building healthier boundaries. Work got better over the next few weeks because I could actually focus on my projects instead of thinking about mysteries all day. I finished a big report 2 days early, and my boss sent me an email saying she was glad to see me back on track. The concerned messages about my performance stopped coming, and that felt really good. I was proving to myself that I could be normal and do my actual job without getting lost in weird obsessions. My coworker asked if I wanted to grab lunch, and I said yes, without checking my phone 50 times first. We talked about regular stuff like sports and weekend plans, and it felt easy in a way it hadn't for months. I realized I'd been so wrapped up in the dress thing that I'd basically stopped being a real person at work. Getting back to normal interactions reminded me what life was supposed to feel like. In my next therapy session with Jane, I brought up the whole private investigator situation because it was still bothering me. I told her how I'd hired someone to follow Chelsea and how that seemed like it should count as progress because at least I wasn't doing the following myself. Jane looked at me for a second and then explained that paying someone else to do the obsessive behavior was just another way of feeding the problem. She said I was trying to outsource my compulsion instead of actually dealing with what was driving it. That hit me hard because she was totally right. I hadn't stopped being obsessive. I'd just found a new way to keep doing it while pretending I had boundaries. We spent the rest of the session talking about how the PI was basically an extension of my own inability to let things go. Jane asked what I thought would happen if the PI had gotten me the answer, and I realized I probably would have just found something else to obsess over. The dress was never really the problem. It was how my brain handled not knowing things. That was a tough thing to accept, but it made sense. A few days later, I looked up the PI's office number and called them. The receptionist answered, and I asked to speak to someone about closing out my file completely. They transferred me to some guy who pulled up my information, and I told him I didn't want any future work done and to delete my contact details. He said sure, and that was it. The whole call took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt important. I was cutting off that option for good, so I couldn't fall back on it if I got weird again. Hanging up the phone, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd actually finished something instead of just letting it fade away. It was a small thing, but Jane had taught me that small actions add up when you're trying to change patterns. 3 weeks after Chelsea and I met at the coffee shop, my phone buzzed with a text from her number. My stomach dropped for a second because I wasn't sure what to expect. I opened it and saw she'd sent a photo of her closet with a note that said, "For closure. Please don't keep this going." The photo showed about 7 identical green dresses hanging in a row, all the same style and color. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds just taking it in. 7 dresses. That was the answer I'd spent months losing my mind over. 7 identical dresses because she liked having a uniform. I typed back a quick thank you, and then I did something that would have been impossible 2 months ago. I deleted the photo without saving it or studying it or zooming in to look at details. I just deleted it and put my phone down. In my next session, I told Jane about the photo and how I'd deleted it right away. She actually smiled and said she was proud of me for not saving it or obsessing over it. She asked how it felt to finally have the answer, and I told her honestly that it felt less important than I thought it would. The answer didn't matter as much as learning to be okay without it. Jane said that was real growth, and I could tell she meant it. My sleep started getting way better around this time. For months, I'd been having these dreams about green fabric and hidden closets in Chelsea's apartment. But now I was dreaming about normal stuff like work presentations and playing basketball and random weird things that didn't mean anything. I'd wake up actually feeling rested instead of tired and anxious. Not obsessing about the mystery all the time meant my brain could finally relax at night. I started looking forward to sleep again instead of dreading the dreams. One morning I was getting coffee before work, and I noticed my neighbor leaving his apartment at exactly 7:15 for the 3rd day in a row. My brain immediately started doing that thing where it wanted to figure out the pattern. Was he going to the gym? Meeting someone? Why always 7:15? I felt the familiar pull to start tracking it, and then I caught myself. I literally stopped walking and took a breath and used one of Jane's techniques about letting questions exist without needing answers. The neighbor's schedule was none of my business, and I didn't need to know why he left at 7:15. I kept walking to my car and felt genuinely proud that I'd noticed the obsessive thought starting and shut it down. That was the first time I'd caught it in real time and actually stopped myself. Steve called me up and asked if I wanted to go to a basketball game that Friday. We got tickets in the upper deck and spent the whole game talking trash about the refs and eating these overpriced nachos that were honestly pretty good. I was completely present for the first time in forever. I wasn't checking my phone or thinking about mysteries or wondering about anything except whether the ref was blind for missing that obvious foul. Steve made some joke about the other team, and I laughed so hard I almost choked on a chip. Being able to just exist in the moment without my brain spinning off into obsessive thoughts felt amazing. After the game, Steve said it was good to have me back, and I knew what he meant. I'd been physically there for months, but mentally I'd been somewhere else. Now I was actually back. The next week, I was at the grocery store pushing my cart through the produce section when I saw Chelsea reaching for some apples. My heart jumped for a second, but in a normal way, not in a panicked, obsessive way. We made eye contact and both said hi. She asked how I was doing, and I said good and asked her the same. She said she was good too. We stood there for maybe 10 more seconds, and then she said it was nice to see me and kept shopping. I did the same. The whole interaction was polite and brief and felt like exactly the right amount of contact. No weirdness, no tension, just two people who used to date running into each other. Walking away, I felt okay about it. She was wearing the green dress, and I noticed it the same way I'd notice someone wearing a blue shirt or jeans. It was just a piece of clothing she liked wearing, and that was completely fine. I didn't feel the need to stare at it or analyze it or figure anything out. It was just a dress. She liked it. That was her choice. I grabbed my groceries and headed to the checkout feeling pretty normal about the whole thing. A woman next to me in line was holding 3 avocados and staring at them like they might reveal their secrets. She turned to me and asked how you could tell if they were ripe. I looked at her avocados and then at mine and felt this weird moment of honesty wash over me. I told her I actually had no idea and that I'd just been making it up when I said that confident 3 days thing to someone else once. She laughed and said she'd been doing the same thing for years, just squeezing them and hoping for the best. We both stood there laughing about how nobody really knows what they're doing with avocados, and it felt surprisingly good to admit I didn't have all the answers. Something about that small moment of honesty made me feel lighter than I had in weeks. 3 days later, my roommate set up a game night with some friends from his work. We played this card game I'd never heard of, and everyone was drinking beer and talking trash. Halfway through the second round, my roommate made some joke about my spreadsheet phase and how I'd color-coded my entire descent into madness. Everyone laughed, including me, and I realized I wasn't defensive about it at all. One of his friends asked what spreadsheet, and my roommate started to explain, but I jumped in and told the whole story myself. I made it funny, playing up how ridiculous I'd been, and people were cracking up. The fact that I could laugh at myself and not feel ashamed or defensive felt like real progress. My roommate caught my eye across the table and gave me this small nod like he was proud of me. The next morning, I opened my laptop and went through all my files looking for every trace of the Chelsea situation. I found backup copies of the spreadsheet in 3 different folders. I found photos I'd taken of her building and screenshots of her social media before she blocked me. I found notes I'd typed into my phone tracking dress conditions and observations. Jane had suggested deleting all of it as a way of removing triggers that might pull me back into obsessive patterns. I selected everything and moved it to the trash. Then I emptied the trash so I couldn't change my mind later. Watching that little animation of files disappearing felt weirdly ceremonial and important. My laptop seemed cleaner somehow, like I'd removed something toxic from it. At my next therapy session, Jane asked how I was feeling about Chelsea living her life completely unbothered by my opinion about her clothing choices. I thought about it for a minute and told her it was exactly how it should be. Her uniform dressing worked for her and helped manage her anxiety, and that was all that mattered. Jane nodded and said that was a big shift from where I'd started. She reminded me that on our first session, I'd been convinced Chelsea owed me an explanation, like her choices were somehow about me. Now I could see that her decisions were hers alone, and she didn't need my approval or understanding. The uniform dressing thing wasn't weird or mysterious. It was just a personal choice that made her life easier. Jane said recognizing that showed real growth in respecting other people's boundaries and autonomy. I'd been on a dating app for a couple weeks and matched with someone who seemed nice. We met for coffee on a Saturday afternoon, and I practiced asking direct questions about things I was curious about. She mentioned she was a vegetarian, and I asked her why instead of just wondering about it silently. She explained her reasons, and it felt good to just have a normal conversation. Later, she mentioned she didn't like talking about her family, and I said okay, and moved on to a different topic. I didn't push or try to figure out why or obsess over what she was hiding. She didn't want to answer something, so I respected that boundary, and we kept talking about other stuff. The whole date felt healthy and normal in a way my dates with Chelsea never had. At the end of coffee, we made plans to see each other again the following week. I told Jane about it at our next session, and she noted that I was building healthier patterns around curiosity and boundaries. She said the fact that I could ask direct questions, but also accept when someone didn't want to answer, showed I was learning to balance my natural curiosity with respect for other people's privacy. Jane pointed out that with Chelsea, I'd never just asked about the dress directly, because I'd been too caught up in solving the mystery myself. Now I was practicing being upfront about my curiosity, while also being okay with not getting every answer. That felt like a major shift in how I approached relationships and other people in general. I started keeping a journal where I wrote about the concept that not everything needs to be solved or understood. Some mysteries could just exist without consuming me or taking over my entire life. I wrote about how the need to know everything had almost destroyed a good relationship, and definitely destroyed my peace of mind for months. I wrote about how Chelsea's dress had become this symbol of everything I couldn't control, and how that had spiraled into obsessive behavior that crossed serious lines. Writing it all out helped me process how I'd let curiosity turn into compulsion, and how I needed to build tolerance for uncertainty. Jane had said that sitting with not knowing was a skill I needed to develop, and the journaling seemed to help with that. Steve came over to watch a game, and during halftime, he brought up the whole closet situation. He was laughing about how I'd built it up into this huge, mysterious thing when it was just a normal closet with a fancy door. I laughed too, and told him I couldn't believe I'd hired a private investigator over a dress. Steve said the PI story was his favorite part, because the guy had basically told me I was insane and then blocked my number. We both cracked up about that, and I acknowledged how badly I'd crossed the line with all of it. Steve said he was glad I could laugh about it now, instead of getting defensive or trying to justify what I'd done. He said the old version of me from 6 months ago would have argued that I'd had good reasons for everything. Walking home from Steve's place, I passed a store window that had a whole display of green dresses. They were slightly different shades and styles, but they were all green and all dresses. I glanced at them and kept walking without stopping to stare or analyze or compare them to Chelsea's dress. They were just clothes in a store window, nothing more than that. The color green didn't make me think about mysteries or obsessions or spreadsheets anymore. It was just a color, and those were just dresses, and I was just a person walking past a store. The fact that I could do that without my brain spinning off into old patterns felt like a real victory. Back in my apartment that night, I sat down with a jigsaw puzzle I'd actually bought from a store instead of obsessing over some mystery I'd created in my head. I worked on the edge pieces and thought about how I still liked solving things, but I liked being a decent person more. The mystery of Chelsea's dress had taught me that some answers weren't worth the cost of getting them. Following someone and hiring investigators and violating someone's privacy, those things had a price that was way higher than the value of knowing why she wore the same dress. Respecting people's boundaries mattered more than satisfying my curiosity. I could still enjoy puzzles and mysteries, but I needed to keep them in appropriate boxes where they belonged, like actual jigsaw puzzles on my coffee table, instead of real people's private lives. Well, that's the big finish. If you've made it this far, I can't tell if you're dedicated or just bored. Either way, you might as well subscribe. Clearly, you're in too deep now.